Okay, so welcome everybody to this Academy webinar on open access. I was asked to do this because there was a lot of interest within the COST community for this kind of topic. And so I was asked to give an introduction to open access and at the same time also to the policies of Coalition S and Plan S. So maybe a little roadmap, because this might take a long time. You can of course ask me all questions in the Q&A. So I'll first say a little bit why open access. I will talk about the main types of open access. I will talk also about Creative Commons licenses, because those are important for certain actions, and those will be referenced in the policies that Coalition S and Plan S they have developed. And I will talk also a little bit about some common misconceptions about open access. That will be a first set of about 9 slides, after which I will give you the opportunity to ask questions and maybe answer some questions if need be, because that first part is really about the basics of open access. So basically the introduction of terms, terminology, and to make you a little bit more familiar with the types and the types of open access and the licenses. And then the longer part of this discussion will be Plan S and Coalition S policies and tools, basically explaining what Coalition S did and what we expect of our grantees. And since you are yourselves also grantees, possibly of more grants than just the ones from cost actions, this may be important for you as well, all the more so because it is likely that COST will also align with Coalition S in the near future. At least that's what I hope. Okay, let's get started with why open access. Well, traditionally, just taking you back into prehistory, research publications are only accessible via a subscription. That was in the print era, of course. In the electronic era, this meant that electronic access is protected by a paywall. You have to pay to get access. I think you have all experienced this. If you don't have a subscription, you can pay per article via a paywall. But of course, this practice is inequitable because you have to have the money to pay for the article. You have to have the money to pay for the subscription, or your university has that money to pay for the subscription. And this slows down research. It also is inequitable because it excludes people who don't have a subscription. If you work at a university, your university may have a subscription for you. If you're a private citizen or a practitioner or a lawyer or a nurse and you want to have access to the relevant literature, you need to pay. So this is very unfortunate. Only those who can pay can read. Open access then tries to mend that situation by making research publications freely available to read so that everybody can have access to them. That's the first purpose. And open access articles are not only freely available to read, it's very important to say this, but also to reuse. We want these articles to be reusable so that other people can build on them, criticize them, make progress, make scientific progress. And ideally, of course, in the ideal situation, these articles are also machine readable, because there's, of course, a lot of machine readable tools now that are available that allow to aggregate results from various studies and come to even deeper insights. So this is also something we want in the ideal situation. Why open access? Well, open access, of course, is important for society. It makes research available faster, so others can build on it. This accelerates, in turn, scientific discovery. And open access, therefore, enhances society's return on investment in science. We all know, as taxpayers, taxpayers invest in science via ministries of education, via agencies, via universities. In the ideal scenario, the taxpayers want that return on investment in science to be as fast as possible. Think of COVID, for instance. When a pandemic occurs, you want therapies and vaccines as fast as possible, and that can only be done via a concerted effort of all actors and scientists involved. And this is, of course, true. What is true for COVID also counts for other diseases and counts for other aspects of society, climate change, you name it. For researchers, open access is also important. People often forget that. Authors often forget that they want to publish in their favorite journals, traditional journals. But many studies have demonstrated that articles in open access actually have significantly greater impact, visibility, and citation advantage. And this is normal. I mean, more people can see your article, can read your article, can cite it more quickly. So they are, and they are not only available to a larger readership of scholars, but also to medical practitioners, patient groups, policymakers, not-for-profit workers, etc. Also think, you know, I know I give a lot of examples here from the medical field, but also think museum curators, artists, social workers. I mean, there's many people who may be touched by your research that you do not immediately realize. And open access just gives you access to the entire world population, so to speak, as your potential readership, rather than those happy few who have a subscription to the journal that you happen to publish in. Open access is, of course, part of a much wider movement of open science, a change which is really signals a change in how research is done. Open access is the first step to open science, I always say, because, of course, if an article is open access, then the open data that are behind it can also be made available. An article in a very real sense functions as a portal to the data that are behind it, to the protocols that are behind it. So open science, of course, is a tendency towards making science a more collaborative and less competitive by making all things open. We invite other people to collaborate with us as researchers. So these are the three advantages, I think, of open access for society, for researchers, and for open science, and a new type of science that is emerging. Here I give an excellent overview from us in University Library Services that gives you in one fell swoop sort of all the advantages of open access: increased visibility, citation rates, innovation drive, global impact, public access for all, new audiences, and also, of course, compliance with funded policies, which is in a sense the least the least important. The more important ones, the funders only ask for this compliance because they want to achieve all of these other goals. So citation rates, visibility rates are much higher. You can read this slide more easily, perhaps after the presentation. Let me talk about, there's various business models for open access. Let me talk about those. Those are usually indicated with colors. Gold open access is the term that is used for immediate access via an online journal at the publisher. So that means that originally in gold open access there was no distinction made in terms of payment. So basically, for some gold open access journals you had to pay. For other gold open access journals there was no need to pay. But in fact, this usage has evolved. It's important to know that, because today gold open access increasingly refers to open access that is paid for by paying an article processing charge. And this article processing charge is then paid by the author or by the funder or by the university by the author or the funder, in case you have a funding scheme from a specific funder, or also by university libraries via read and publish deals. So read and publish deals, I will talk about those a little bit later as well, are deals in which the university makes a contract with the publisher to not only have read access to the publications of that publisher, but also allows the scholars at that university to publish for free in the journals of that publisher. So that is a read and publish deal, which is more encompassing and frees the researcher at that university from the burden of having to pay for the individual articles they publish. So this is traditionally considered gold open access. Of course, open access signals an important, this gold open access, especially gold open access, signals an important shift in payments, right? Where before payments were made by readers or university libraries, right? So you paid to read, to have access to a paper. And the reader paid, basically, where I include in readers university libraries. Now the payments, those payments shifts to payment by producers, and we will show that we will see in a bit that this creates, of course, other inequities, because producers are not always able to pay for these article processing charges. So that's gold open access. Go to the next item. So next up is green open access. Green open access is about articles that are published in old-fashioned subscription journals that are then made available by the author or by the university library of the author in a repository. And a repository is usually an institutional repository. And these articles are made available in the repository, usually after an embargo period, 6 to 12 months after the publication set by the publisher. So an embargo period, just to be clear, is a period during which the article is not present in the repository, cannot be read by people who do not have a subscription. And so there is still need to pay to have access to that article. And after the 6 to 12 months, a copy of that paper becomes available in a repository and therefore becomes open access after this embargo period. Needless to say, an embargo period is again very inequitable. It slows down research. It is something that was instituted or asked for by the publishers many years ago. This is about a situation described here is about a situation that was reached as 10 to 12 years ago, and it is really something that we now want to change. Coalition S, for instance, asks for publication in open access without embargo, because again, embargoes slow down research and slow down access to the publication, which is not to say that repositories do not fulfill an important role. They do fulfill an important role. They give access to the research published by that university, if it's a university repository. And repositories have also another role. They also very often give access to preprints and to dissertations of the university. So they play an important role in the ecosystem of open access going forward. So this is for green. Then, of course, in repositories, no payment is involved. After 6 or 12 months, this article is made freely available on the repository and is free to read for everybody. So I already said before that gold used to refer to all papers available in open access, both those that are paid for and those that are not paid for. As I said, usage has changed so that gold open access now really has come to mean those open access journals where you have to pay to get your article published. And in contradistinction with gold now, the term diamond or platinum has been developed for a model of publication that has no charges for readers or authors. And this is, I think, an important model. My own journal is a diamond open access model, a diamond open access journal. These are very often community-driven, academic-led and academic-owned journals. So these are not commercial publishers that do this. And these diamond journals also serve a variety of small-scale, multilingual and multicultural scholarly communities. And we have set up, as Coalition has been a number of other partners, a project to make these to consolidate these diamond journals and to make them more visible in the ecosystem. Of course, needless to say, this model is very equitable by nature and design because the publication only depends on the quality of what is being published and does not depend in any way, shape or form on the financial capacity of the author or of the reader. So this is why this is a model that I at least like very much. It is also a model that is very much alive in South America, where they have a very vibrant ecosystem of open access journals that are run on the Diamond model, with of course payments being made to make these journals sustainable by governments and universities and in-kind contributions of authors. Because there is no free lunch, publication costs money, it is just a matter of who carries that cost. Whether this is done by a commercial publisher or by a non-commercial publisher. And Diamond is very much a non-commercial approach to scientific publication. Okay, then finally, there is hybrid open access. So hybrid open access is sort of the worst of both worlds for me. So these are journals that are part subscription, part open access. So basically, if you can pay for the fee, your article will be published in the journal under open access. If you can't pay, it will be under subscription. So this journal, these are journals that have content that is partly hidden behind a paywall and partly available. What happens in these cases very often, despite disclaimers by the publishers, is that the publishers, of course, eats from two revenue streams at the same time, because publisher charges for both subscriptions from the libraries and for APCs from the authors. So this practice is known as double dipping. It is, of course, quite expensive for the libraries who have to pay twice for the same journal, in a sense. And we have also noticed that this model, when it first came up, was indeed a promise to transition all journals to open access. But in 2018, we noticed that this model had stalled, that about most hybrid journals stalled around about 20% open access, and that it was clear that this was not going to lead to a transition to open access. It is also why specifically Coalition S and Plan S, it has a ban against hybrid journals. So we will not pay for publication in hybrid journals because we want the transition to accelerate towards open access. Okay. A second aspect that I should mention here is Creative Commons licenses. I mentioned this because it will become important in the rest of my presentation about Coalition S policies. Creative Commons licenses are basically licenses that give the author, who is the original copyright holder of any work, any publication, book, software, you name it, a public copyright license that enables free distribution of a public work and that regulates this. So it is important to know about Creative Commons licenses. I'll give a little bit a CC license. Is something that you can give as an author, or you can assign to your work to give other people the rights to share, use, and build upon the work that you have created. So for Coalition S and for researchers more generally, the most relevant license we believe is the so-called CC BY license, which basically asks which basically allows the user of the article to share and adapt the publication, provided that appropriate credit is given, and that the user indicates whether the publication has been changed or whether aspects of the publication have been changed. And that, of course, is very much in line with what scholars already do. This is sort of current academic practice. And this is why we have selected as Coalition S this CC BY license as the license that authors that are funded by Coalition S funders need to choose in order to license their articles as the original copyright holders. We very often get questions, well, why didn't you choose a more restrictive license? And in fact, there are very good reasons for that. For instance, the question is, why didn't you use NC, non-commercial? Well, we don't want to choose non-commercial because many researchers or research funders fund research that may result into important insights, for instance, in the medical sector. And if medications need to be developed that are commercial medications, then we want that to be able to happen. The point of view of the medical funders is very much, once the research is done, whatever everybody else does with that, even if they earn money with it, that is not our problem. We have done the research, we have put it out there, it's for others to use. It's a little bit the same with water out of the faucet, so to speak. You know, if you are able to bottle that and sell it, well, good luck to you. You know, this is the same. This is the same for articles in open access with the CC BY license. Everybody should be able to use those to better themselves or to better humanity. And so that's why we don't do this C license. We also don't do the share alike license, which again restricts the authors that would like to cite these papers or reuse papers in the way they share the articles. Again, we don't want to prejudge ways in which research is shared. And the same is true for the ND license, no derivatives. One of the things a lot of people like ND or think they like ND, it's not that we don't allow it, but it has to be motivated for a coalitionist. So no derivatives, for instance, people often forget that, does not allow people to translate your work, which is a little bit restrictive, of course, because I mean, why wouldn't you as an academic or as a researcher want your research or to be translated or parts of it to be translated for, again, to reach a wider audience. And so this is one of the reasons we do not favor the ND license. So CC BY it is. And I would very much recommend that going forward, you all use the CC BY license on your articles going forward, also to prevent publishers from appropriating copyright for themselves, so that you keep your copyright. I will tell you about the advantages of this in a little bit. Again, so there's finally, to conclude this section, there's a number of common misconceptions about open access. The idea that open access are low quality, that's certainly a tale. It is true that there are predatory journals out there, predatory journals who who only want to publish without proper review and for a fee. They are out there, but as I always say, you know a predatory journal when you see one. When a journal contacts you to publish in their journal and starts making advances to you to publish your articles, you should be very wary. Usually researchers who have been trained know the journals that they are expected to publish in and are able to distinguish predatory journals from non-predatory journals. And when in doubt, ask your colleagues. This is something that is very commonly done, I believe, among scholars. I get such questions on a weekly basis from fellow linguists. There is also a quality standard that has been developed by the Directory of Open Access Journals, who really screen open access journals for a number of quality factors in terms of review, in terms of stability and sustainability. So again, when in doubt about an open access journal, consult the Directory of Open Access Journals. It is not fail-safe. There may be a couple of journals in there that are a bit dodgy. That's always the case, but it is your best assurance of quality for open access journals. A second canard that is going the rounds is that open access means loss of intellectual property. I think I have tried to explain to you that this is not at all the case. There are the CC licenses to protect your intellectual rights as an author. And as I always say, the real way in which you can lose your intellectual property is by signing away the copyright to the publishers, which often happens because authors do not realize that by signing a copyright transfer agreement, they sign away all the intellectual rights to their article. Very often authors are much less concerned about signing a contract about a copyright with publishers than they would be, for instance, when buying a house or a car, when they would read the contract. If you read the contract of a copyright transfer agreement and you properly understand it, you will see that in fact you lose all the rights to your publication, including translation rights, including rights to all sorts of pictures and tables and that you have put into the article. And this is not something that we should want as researchers. At least we should have the right to reuse our own work without having to ask the publisher for permission. I feel very strongly about that, as you can see. So this is something that I will come back to again in the rest of my presentation. Finally, there is another, third, there is another misconception, which is that open access is only for journal publications. That's certainly not the case. It also applies to data, software, academic books, preprints, and dissertations that are made available in repositories. So open access is really a broad church. It is true that it is especially important for journal publications. That is also why Coalition S and Plan S started with journal publications first, because, as I said, those are the portals to the main research. But it definitely also applies to other outputs. And finally, there's this misconception that open access requires money for APCs. Again, this is, of course, something that commercial publishers would like you to believe. But you have every right to deposit your paper in a repository. I will talk about that in a little bit, about how you can do that via the rights retention strategy in my presentation of the policies of Coalition S and Plan S. And there are, of course, thousands of Diamond open access journals out there. You can look at those in DOA AJ, the directory of open access journals, and the directory of open access journals will even conveniently specify whether or not these journals ask for an article processing charge or not. So you can easily identify those journals there and see for yourself whether this is a journal where you would like to publish in an equitable way. Okay, at this point, I think I will stop for a minute and see if there's anything in the Q&A, but I don't see any questions in the Q&A. If you have any questions, you can also put them in the chat, I believe, but I think you've been asked to do this via the Q&A, so it's always easier. Any questions at this point? I will pause here deliberately to give you the opportunity to ask questions. I see no questions in the Q&A. Thomas Richard has raised their hand. Yes, Thomas, I don't know how to give you the right to speak. So I think some of the moderators should be able to do that. If you, yeah.
So any questions should be put in the Q&A. So only written questions in this webinar to make sure it's not getting too long. So any questions in the Q&A, please. But there's a few in the Q&A now, Johan.
Yes, I see a couple of questions. Eriona Kanga has a question about that open access, because the display are sometimes lower quality. Like I said, I think that's not necessarily the case. If a journal is in DOAJ, it has passed really quite stringent quality assessment criteria. So you can look there for journals that have applied these, that do apply rigorous selection criteria and are not necessarily lower quality. You are the one to determine, of course, whether this journal corresponds to your field and responds to the requirements that you have for your articles. But definitely lower quality is not something that is typical for open access. Fast publication, Ariana, yes, that is something that really depends a lot on the journal. Sometimes journals give you information about that, sometimes not. You can always ask the editor. That fast publication depends a lot also on the reviewing process. How long reviewers get to do their reviews, how long they take to do their reviews. That really depends on how demanding the editors are and how fast the reviewers are. So there's no single answer that can be given there. Angela has a question about how does one establish a Diamond Open Access journal? Well, if you want to establish a Diamond Open Access journal, talk to me. I mean, I do have some ways of doing that. You can talk to other Diamond journals. Of course, you need some support. You need definitely need some support to do that. But many people have done that before. It really depends on whether you have a community to do that, whether you have fellow editors that want to set that up, whether you have access to a library or to a university department that is willing to support you financially, or that is willing to give you time to set up the Diamond Open Access Journal. So there's many factors involved here, and if you really have plans to set up a Diamond Open Access Journal, you can contact me. We are also in the project setting up materials in order to be able to do that. So 3 years from now, it would be much easier to answer your questions, because we will establish a capacity center for exactly this purpose, with materials for prospective journal editors to set up their own Diamond Open Access Journal, and to also make it sustainable in various ways. I see Daniela. Daniela's question, is it possible to get the PP presentation later? Yes, and this will also be recorded. If you deposit an article in a repository, does this block the publishing in an open access journal? No, not necessarily. It really depends on the journal. If you deposit it in an open access journal that requires copyright, then it might be. But if you have applied a CC BY license to the article before you even submit it, or if the open access journal has itself a policy of CC BY, you are free to do with that article as you wish. So you can deposit in a repository and subsequently publish it in an open access journal, as long as you update the version in the repository later on, in the sense that after submission to the open access journal and the reviews, the article will change. So you have to update and very clearly say that this is the second version of your paper. But in principle, there is no ban on publishing the article in a repository if it is in an open access journal that accepts CC BY licenses. Did I understand you correctly that Cost Action do not support open access publication in hybrid journals? No, I did not say that. Cost Action, as we speak, is not yet a member of Coalition S, and it does not apply Plan S principles. So in principle, you would still be allowed to publish in a hybrid journal, though I would very strongly recommend against that.
Johan, can I briefly also answer on this, since the question concerns cost? So yeah. Indeed, it's right what Johan said. So our current rule says that it should be according to principles of open access. So if you interpret this as widely as possible, then indeed you could still publish in a hybrid journal, because it's not explicitly stated that you can't. However, also of course, principles of open access, they also evolve according to the time, and we already see there's now a coalition as several parties have come together with these principles. So we would also encourage people to follow these principles and not go for the hybrid one. It's not strictly not allowed, but it's also something we don't particularly encourage for the moment, especially because we see that there is indeed a strong support in the community for, say, the coalition as principles. So let's say there's the legal question. Yes, currently the rules allow you to, but there's also the more general question, and we would say go for more the really inclusive open access forms. And the hybrid form, as Johan explained, is maybe a form of open access which will eventually be fall a bit out of grace. However, for the moment, it's indeed still possible to publish in an open access journal and get the APC reimbursed, of course, with the approval in your action of the science officer. That's also important. Not anything can just be, let's say, you can't just send the bill to cost, so to say. It has to be part of your dissemination strategy, etc., etc.
Yeah, thank you, Alvin. That's very encouraging to hear. Mattia Bellini has a question about green open access that can be stored in a repository after an embargo period. Is this something that has to be signed in advance? No, this is not something that has to be signed in advance. Most publishers have a policy and state that policy on their website that you can deposit after 6 or after 12 months. It depends on the field. I think in the humanities, it's usually 12 months. In STEM sciences, it's 6 months. So you are allowed to do that. Sometimes you are even allowed to do so by law. In the Netherlands, for instance, there is an amendment to that allows you by law to deposit articles in a repository after 6 to 12 months. So you do not have to sign anything in advance. And actually, we have put into place in Coalition S a strategy that allows you to do so from day one, from publication, which is something that I will talk about in a minute. It's a rather offensive strategy towards the publishers, but it is definitely one that works even if the publishers don't like it. The regions of impact factor of these open access journals, of course, vary. Anonymous attendee, they vary. You can again consult those in the OAJ. We tend to frown upon impact factors because the impact factor, even though they are still important for certain universities, are based on very bad methodology. They are basically meaningless. We know this from various studies. And this is something that via Principle 10 and via also the reform of research assessment is something that we will eliminate from consideration of evaluation in the very near future. A very big problem is not quite away, but the impact factor problem. Yes, like I said, we will change this. I have very good hopes that within 10 years nobody will mention the word impact factor again, or as some very old-fashioned dinosaur-like artifact that that evaluators used to use. So this is the metrics. Our Principle 10 from Plan S explicitly commits the funders not to use metrics. Purely quantitative metrics and impact factors when evaluating researchers for funding. So this is already very important. The same, I think, will happen at universities with the reform of research assessment that has just started with 350 institutions across Europe, led by Science Europe and a number of other partners and the EC. So we will see a radical change in the research assessment landscape in the next 5 to 10 years. So don't look at the impact factor. Examine the community that you are that your journal represents, and check whether that is the journal and the community that you want to publish in. To sum up, Anne-Sophie, you recommend publishing gold or diamond open access with CC BY license? Correct? Yes, I definitely do recommend that. And I would recommend for you to publish rather in diamond open access journals than in gold open access journals. By doing so, you raise the profile of those diamond open access journals. Gold open access journals, as I said, I think are inherently inequitable because of the price they charge. But if you wish to publish there, of course, and you have the money for it, you can definitely do so. Predatory journals usually present themselves as OAJ and even OAJ. The best check is to go to the OAJ and check, type in the journal and check. That is definitely one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is going to our journal checker tool as Coalition S and check it there. That journal checker tool is also based on the OAJ. Very good journals in natural science are still hybrid. Yes, I know it's a problem, but we don't support. We will not pay for publication there. You can publish if you have the money. It's compliant with what we do, but your funder will not pay for it. So I would very much recommend that you try to avoid those journals as possible. If I deposit an article, sorry, I think I answered most questions now. Okay, great. The questions are ebbing away.
Of course, I think there's still the question how to establish a diamond open access journal, but
yes,
maybe that's a very big question to answer.
Yes, it's a large question to answer, so it's something that I could do a different seminar on. And I think I did answer it. I suggested Angela contact me to talk about it, because it really depends on the support that you can garner for this with fellow editors in kind contributions, support from a library maybe. there's various things that you need to consider, whether you can find editors with experience to help you in doing that. Then there is a question, if impact factor is not a good metric, what will replace it? Well, there are various new metrics being developed, more qualitatively oriented metrics. In terms of selection for funding, for instance, most of our funders now work with a narrative CV, where researchers can present themselves what they think are their major contributions to science. So that is one way of doing it. Is there a list of existing Diamond OA journals by field? I am not sure. I think in some fields there are. I mean, for instance, linguistics there is, but in other domains I am not sure. Again, you would have to look at the DOAJ and see there whether there are journals there that you can select. But I'm not sure that the DOAJ allows for selection by specific discipline and then by Diamond. I would have to look. Can you leave the contact and the journal name in the chat so that we can... I'm not sure, Tamara, if I understand your question. The contact and the journal name, which journal name and which contact are we talking about? Not sure about this one. Yeah, my contact. Yes, you can find my name or online. I mean, there's only one Johan Rorik, so that makes it very easy to find me. And the journal that I publish is Glossa, a journal of general linguistics. I can type that here. So my name is Johan Rorik, and the journal is Glossa. Journal, which you can find online, of course. Type it here. Yeah. So now it's answered in the question. All right. Any other questions at this point? If not, I'll seg into the next section, which is still requires a bit of time, but we'll see how it goes. I think we had an hour and a half, right, Elvin?
Yes, that's correct. Until 11:30. Yes.
Yes. The next section should take me about 25 minutes. So let me close the Q&A and go on with the Coalition S. So Coalition S is basically an alliance, an informal organization of 28 organizations worldwide, with a number of national funders from Australia to the UK. The European Commission with Horizon Europe is also aligned with Coalition S. We have a number of charitable foundations, mostly medical funders, as you can see, from the Wellcome Trust to Aligning Science Across Parkinson's. There's a global dimension with the World Health Organization, Jordan, Zambia, and South Africa on board. And the coalition as a whole invests about 335 billion euros per year in research, with an output of around 150,000 articles a year. That is not much in the grand scheme of things, but of course the research coming out of Coalition S is quite selective and has a large impact, a much larger impact than the numbers would lead you to believe. So Plan S, which is the plan that is associated with Coalition S, it has a single goal, basically to make sure that all scholarly publications that come out of the funding that we give to researchers are available open access in one way or another. So either via open access journals, via platforms, via repositories without embargo, but those papers have to be available one way or another. So funded researchers must make sure that all peer-reviewed articles are available in immediate open access with a CC BY license. So this is where CC BY license comes in, guys. This is important. So we want researchers to retain their intellectual rights for the papers that they publish. This is very important. And not all publishers are on board with that, as we will see. This, of course, has been echoed now by the White House OSTP memo, the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So OSTP now recommends that all the federal agencies in the US update their policies to immediate open access. So all research has to be available in a repository without an embargo on publication as of 2025. And this will apply to 400 federal agencies and $150 billion in research funds. So this is really important. Coalition, it clearly echoes the Coalition's goal of full and immediate open access. In addition, they also want it to be equitable. So we will see how that plays out. But what we are clearly seeing here is global alignment around full and immediate open access. And I think that is extremely important. And of course, we hope to be working with our American colleagues to make that possible, because we have a number of policies in place that could support this. Plan S itself is not a policy. Plan S is in fact a set of 10 principles that we live by. You can find them on our website, on the Coalition S website. I will not go into detail here. I will just give an overview. And what Plan S funders have decided is to align their policies along with the lines of these 10 principles. So that is important. A couple of highlights. As I said, strong principles. Open access must be immediate without embargo periods. Publication must be under a CC BY license. We do not condone a hybrid model of publication except as a transitional arrangement with a defined endpoint. So that what we mean by that is, if a journal is hybrid, then we want that journal to commit to a timeline by which the journal shall be completely open access. Only in those cases will we pay. If not, we don't pay. We also think that pricing contracts and publication fees have to be transparent and in line with the services provided, and funders commit to support these publication fees. So if you are funded by a Coalition S funder and you want to publish in a gold open access journal or in a journal that is under a transitional arrangement, then the funders will support that. We do not want individual researchers to pay out of the inheritance of their grandmother. There is, of course, also an assessment, as I already said, a commitment to assess research outputs based on their intrinsic merits and not on the venue of publication or on quantitative metrics. So we want to get rid of the competition, and we want to get rid of this obsession with high prestige journals like Science or Nature. This is not good for research. It is research as competition rather than research as collaboration. And we want to get rid of that as fast as possible. So these are important principles to live by. In terms of the Plan S implementation, what is important to know is that we do not favor any particular business models. We just want all those business models to be in line with open access. We also don't think there is one silver bullet approach to open access. You have many people who say, well, if you simply ditch the commercial publishers and you do this or that or the other, then, the paradise on earth will arrive immediately for all researchers. But we do not believe that is possible. We believe in a gradual transition with various complementary and integrated policies and all levels of open access. So it's a very pragmatic approach rather than a utopian approach. We also seek alignment and coordinations with various other organizations, university associations, open access repositories, and so on. I will tell you about that in a minute. And we are, of course, in contact with publishers, organizations about our policies in order to push them to adopt these new models for open access. We also monitor how this will affect early career researchers, because of course early career researchers are often very concerned how this move to open access will affect their career path. Usually young researchers are quite open to open access. For them it's a no-brainer that you have to reach the entire world. But this is not necessarily the case for those people who assess these young researchers in the long run and give them jobs. So there's a discrepancy there that we think we need to address. We also have a global network of Plan S ambassadors, academics, and open access advocates who engage with the community and who relay their ideas to us. So that's the way we are set up. In practical terms, what does this mean? What does this open access for Plan S funders mean? Well, basically it means that you can publish in open access in 3 ways. One way is the easy route in a way, it's to publish in fully open access journals and pay the fee, or not pay the fee and publish in the Diamond Journal. So those 2 ways that is what we call route 1. Publication in fully open access journals is compliant. It is financially supported if you need funds for it. So this is something that Plan S funders have committed to. Route 2 is slightly more complicated. In many fields, it's still the case that a number of journals are either subscription or they are hybrid. We do not support funding for hybrid journals, as you know. So if you want to absolutely publish in that journal, you are allowed to do so, but it will be behind a paywall. And in that case, we ask you as an author to deposit a copy of the author-accepted manuscript, at least the author-accepted manuscript, in a repository at publication. Again, as I said already, publishers don't like it, but we have developed a strategy for that, especially designed to help you with that and to make sure that that is possible. Route 3 is, again, an easy route. It allows for publication in journals that are under a transformative arrangement, and that is compliant. A transformative arrangement is what I mentioned before as read and publish deals. So if you happen to work at a university that has concluded a read and publish deal with a particular publisher, then you are free to publish in those journals. You do not need to pay. Again, this depends on the university that you work at, but it is a viable route towards open access. As a researcher, of course, you don't know whether your favorite journal complies to one of these 3 routes. And that's why we have developed for researchers the Journal Checker tool. And the Journal Checker tool is basically a search engine that allows researchers to navigate the complexity of open access and identify how their favorite journal, say Cell from Elsevier, meets open access obligations. So for instance, basically you need to fill out 3 fields, the journal, your funder, and your university. And those 3 fields will give you an indication of how you can do this. So is this a transformative journal in your country or from your university? Well, then in that case, you can publish in it. If it is not, then you have to seek another way. Then you have to perhaps apply the rights retention strategy. So all of this is explained in the Journal Checker tool. The Journal Checker tool allows you to seek compliance and to meet your open access obligation as a researcher. So it's a very important tool that we put at the disposal of researchers to make sure that they can publish in open access without any problems. I'll say something more about transformative agreements, right? Like I said, these are publishing models where the publisher has concluded a read and publish deal with the university. These transformative arrangements have various names. They are called transformative agreements, read and publish deals. Subscribe to Open is another form of this. And we at Coalition S have developed our own model for this, which is the transformative journal model. These transition, like I said, occurs at the level of the library consortia. And this is something you can check in the Journal Checker tool, whether your library consortium or the library consortium that your university is part of has subscribed to a read and publish deal or not, but it does allow you to publish open access. And some of our funders contribute to these efforts or are actively involved in negotiations leading to these agreements. And we can see indeed that transformative agreements, especially in Europe, have contributed enormously to the growth of open access articles. In 2015, you can see the numbers there. There's a large number of articles that have been published in open access thanks to these transformative agreements that libraries have concluded with the publishers. And it is very convenient, of course, for researchers. They do not have to worry about payment in those journals. Usually these transformative agreements are concluded with the big publishers, Elsevier, Wiley, Springer Nature, but it really depends on your jurisdiction and on your country and your library, whether these transformative agreements exist or not. Then there is what we call route 2, the green open access route, which is a little bit more the difficult route. So Planner's principle 1, I already talked about it. We want authors to retain rights to their publications and make sure that they are published in CC BY. And what is important here is to point out that many researchers don't realize, in fact, that they are the original copyright holders of their papers. If you read the copyright transfer agreements that are concluded that you sign very often with publishers, you would never think that you are. They try to make you believe that they are the copyright holder, but they only are when you sign the paper. So as the original copyright holder, you hold the original copyright. And the original copyright holder can decide how they want to license their work. That's just a right that is a legal right that you have as a creator of an original work, guaranteed by law in almost all jurisdictions that we know. And so if you, as the researcher, grant a CC BY license to your work, well, then you keep sufficient intellectual rights to that article. What does that mean? It means that you can reuse the article, you can reuse all text, you can reuse graphs, you can reuse images, you can reuse tables in that article as you please. You do not have to ask for permission of the publisher. This is really very important, because if you sign copyright transfer agreement with a publisher, then you lose those rights. Don't forget, you lose those rights almost always. And then subsequently, you have to ask for permission to reuse any part of your work for later publications. So again, this is not something that we want. That's why we urge researchers to apply a CC BY license to their work. We believe very strongly that open access starts at the source, the author. You know, the best open access, the open access that you determine yourself. So basically, authors who want to publish in subscription journals or in hybrid journals behind the paywall must deposit a copy of the AM of their paper in a repository immediately on publication. That's Planner's policy. Of course, we know that authors often sign these copyright transfer agreements with the publisher that prevent depositing a copy immediately. We know this, but therefore we have developed what we call the rights retention strategy. So we require coalition as grantees via the grant conditions to tell publishers that a prior CC BY license is applied to any future accepted manuscript arising from their submissions. And this is how this works. So by asserting that application of a CC BY license to your paper, that license is prior to the publisher agreement, and therefore has legal precedence over the later copyright transfer agreement. So there's nothing a publisher can do once you have asserted that CC BY license on your author accepted manuscript. Again, like I said, publishers don't like it, but we as researchers should not be doing the things that publishers like and that are only in their financial interests. We believe that we should make sure as researchers that we retain the rights to our publication, that we retain, that we maximize distribution and visibility. That's, I think, our first priority, and not the profit margins of the publishers. So this is why the rights retention strategy is really important, and the responsibility of each of us. This is also something, rights retention is actually also something that you can do when you're not a coalition as funded researcher. You are fully within your rights to exercise CC BY licenses by yourself. So we believe very strongly that, you know, publishers should not be entitled to ownership of the AM. It should remain the intellectual property of the author. And of course, the version of record can be well within the rights of the publishers if need be. So how do we do this? Well, it's actually a couple of small steps that you need to do as a researcher. At the submission, you only need to use the following templated language. You can either use the first or the second sentence of this. So if you are funded by a funder, you can say, look, I was funded by this organization, and the purposes of open access, I apply a Creative Commons attribution license to any author-accepted manuscript that arises from this submission. So basically, you anticipate the CC BY, you say a CC BY license will be applied to the author-accepted manuscript that results from this publication. So you give fair warning to the publisher. Publishers have also been warned by us that this is the case for our grantees, so they are really double checked. Of course, very often publishers don't like this, and they will steer you towards other journals, fully open access journals, or they will try to force you to pay. It is very important that in that case you contact your library or you contact your funder, because of course we want to know about these cases where publishers put obstacles in the way of authors. But even as a non-funded author, you can do this. You can apply a CC BY license to the author-accepted manuscript of any publication, and that automatically gives you the right to deposit that paper in a repository upon publication, that AAM in a repository on publication, without waiting for that embargo period. More importantly, even I think in my experience as an author as well, it allows you to reuse your own materials as you see fit without asking for permission from the publishers. So this. Now, of course, publishers, as I said, don't like it. There's been a lot of smoke and mirrors. Some publishers are knowingly putting authors in difficult situations. They are asking authors to sign contracts that contradict the grant agreement signed with the funder, so are basically putting the authors in an illegal situation. Some of them even delete the rights retention language from the article, which amounts, in my view, to censorship. And very often also they wait until acceptance to present conditions and terms to the authors. So we believe very strongly that the publishers have the right to desk reject articles that come with the rights retention languages, but not to confuse them. What we have seen, in fact, is that there are very, very few journals, only 2 journals that we have no knowledge of, that have refused articles that come with the rights retention language. So they do accept them. And once they accept them, well, you have then the right to, if your article is accepted for publication, to share that AAM in a repository. Already about a couple of thousand articles have been deposited this way in repositories. So a lot of publishers do not object to it or condone it. But we strongly believe that publishers should not mislead their authors. And this is also why we've written a letter asking for clarification, to which we have not received an answer. But for us, it is very important that every researcher take their responsibility and try to apply this rights retention strategy, because only in this way will we win this argument with the publishers. Like I said, publishers do perform an important service, but they should not be rewarded with the ownership of the article. Comparison that I always draw is when you invite a painter to your house to paint your house. Your painter paints your house and you pay them for their services, but you do not hand over the keys to your house. You do not give them ownership for your house just because they have painted your house. In the same way, when a publisher paints your article and puts it, typesets it, copy edits it, makes it nice for publication, and also reviews it, inspects it, that doesn't give them a right to own that paper outright after having done that. So we believe very strongly that ownership of articles should remain within the researcher community. Despite these objections and by the publishers, rights retention strategies receiving broad support. There's been the UNESCO declaration, there's been the G6 declaration, there's been the EUA, European University Association, which represents 850 universities in Europe, the declaration supporting the rights retention strategy. And even the European Council has said that authors should retain sufficient intellectual rights to ensure open access, which is basically a nod towards the rights retention strategy, which allows you to do that very easily. Even more importantly, in my view, is the fact that universities are now adopting rights retention policies. We've seen it in Norway, we've seen it at Bergback, we've also seen it at the University of Edinburgh, and most importantly, the University of Cambridge has adopted a rights retention policy. So what does that mean? It means that all researchers at Cambridge and at these universities now have to apply a rights retention to the AAM of their articles, and they are under contractual obligation to do so, which is even stronger than via funder, because of course, as a researcher at a university, you have a contract with an employment contract with the university in a way that you do not have with a funder. And this is why I believe it's very important that universities start implementing institutional rights retention policies. So the way this works is that the institution basically tells their researchers that they license their institution to make a copy of the AAM immediately available under CC BY license. The university then informs the publishers of this new regulation, which takes precedence over any later copyright transfer agreements, and it happens automatically. So the author doesn't even have to inform the publishers of this. So this very strongly protects researchers. So if you have a chance at your university to put this on the agenda of the university leadership, please do so. Because these are much more powerful, of course, than funder mandates, because, as I said, universities have direct employment contracts with researchers, and as such, the rights retention strategy becomes a contractual obligation. Such policies protect researchers against publishers. So if CC BY, and in a very real sense, we have checked this with lawyer representatives, if CC BY is mandated by the university, and the publisher tries to convince the researcher to drop the CC BY license, then that publisher is committing a tort of procuring a breach of contract. So that basically means procuring a breach of contract is that the publisher is trying to make you, as a researcher, break your previous contract with the university, and that is punishable by law. So that's why I think institutional rights retention policies are extremely powerful tools that we should all promote at our individual universities. So if you can do that, please do. Coalition has also promotes price and service transparency. I will not say much about that, but yesterday we launched that journal comparison service. It is accessible to only libraries and funders to compare prices, to negotiate better contracts with publishers for prices, for APCs and for subscriptions. We also have now launched with other funders like ANR and Openness and Science Europe, we have launched the Diamond Action Plan. This is a plan to align Diamond Open Access journals across Europe and across the world, because we strongly believe that Diamond Open Access journals are the most equitable solution towards research dissemination. It is also an effort to take back the initiative of publication, of academic publication within the academic community. This plan was presented beginning of this year in Paris. Over 130 organizations have now committed to this Diamond Action Plan, and we have 2 important projects that we are participating in to make this go forward. So basically, currently, Diamond Open Access journals are individual islands without much connection, and what we want to do is turn those journals into a community that share common resources, that share common standards, and that share also common sustainability and probably also and also financing for their operations. So that's why we want to rally the entire academic community around this form of publishing that is community governed and scholar owned. Finally, I will also say something about open access to academic books. And then I will stop. Principle 7 of Plan S also said that we should look at open access for open access monographs and book chapters. And last year we produced the statements on academic books with 5 recommendations, where we recognize that, in fact, open access to academic books will take a little bit more time and needs a little bit more of a timeline, because there are lots of smaller publishers that still need to accommodate to the transition to open access. So we do state very strongly that all academic books based on original research by coalition should be made available open access at publication, and that also should retain sufficient intellectual rights on these books. And that they should be under a CC license. Mind you, not necessarily a CC BY license, but any CC license will do. Because again, for books, we understand that more protections may need to be in place. Productions of some books is hugely expensive for smaller publishers, so you need to have some protection of the work that publishers put in there. We do believe strongly, however, that that embargo period should not exceed 12 months. So as you can see here, we condone an embargo period of 12 months, which we do not allow for open access of articles. And again, as for the journal articles, the publishers, the funders state very clearly that they want to financially support open access of books, not necessarily by book processing charges, but by other ways, which we will implement by in collaboration with the Directory of Open Access Books and in collaboration with the OAPM and OA Books Network. So we try to be sensitive to the community there that has thought about these issues going forward. Now, of course, our efforts are tied to all the open science initiatives, the Open Access Cloud in Europe, the Open Research Europe, ORE, which was already mentioned by Elwin, and also research assessment reform, which I briefly mentioned, which is an effort to change the way in which research is assessed, no longer based on impact factors, as I said. Also not just focused on journal article production, so moving away from prestige factors and competition and focusing on a variety of contributions to science, not just articles, but also reviewing, publishing, data, curation, and so on and so forth. All the possible contributions that we as scientists make to the advancement of science and the scholarly effort. Again, as I said, 350 organizations from 40 countries have expressed an interest and are now currently signing an effort that is called COARA, so the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. And this is a coalition that you will hear more of in the coming years. They will slowly change the way in which we are all assessed and move us away from the rat race that we are currently engaged in as researchers. This, of course, echoes DORA principles, echoes Principle 10 of Plan S, which said that the funders commit that they assess research outputs by the intrinsic merit of the work and not the publication channel's impact factor or the publisher. Okay, and with this very general remark, I will open my presentation for discussion, questions, and answer, and I will stop sharing.
Yeah, so again, if you have questions, there's already a few questions in the Q&A. Put them in the Q&A and Johan will answer to them as far as he is able to, of course.
As far as I understood, green publishing is not the best way because one has to wait 6 to 12 months. Yes, that was true before, but it's no longer true under the rights retention strategy. If you apply the rights retention strategy, you can make your paper available immediately on publication, but it is contingent on you using the rights retention strategy and of mentioning that very important phrase that you apply a CC BY license to the EAM resulting from your publication. So that is also green. Of course, you also write self-archiving can be done at the preprint, making access to the paper available even before journal publishing. That is certainly considered green. It is certainly considered a valuable way to publish the results, but it is not in line with Coalition S policy. Coalition S policy really insists that the author accepted manuscript, so that means the manuscript that has taken into account all the reviews, and has been accepted by the editor, not necessarily by the publisher, but the editor has said, look, this article is publishable. That version has to be deposited in a repository upon publication of your article in the journal. So that's my answer to anonymous attendee. Where should we include the rights retention suggestions? You can include it where you want. You can include it in the first footnote of the article. You can include it in the submission letter, as long as you include it somewhere. You can include it both in the manuscript and in the cover letter. I would strongly suggest you to do both, so that there is no excuse that, you know, that it is in the first footnote of your article and in the cover letter. I apply a CC BY license to the author accepted manuscript of this submission. That's all you need to say. And again, you know, the publishers won't like it, but they don't have to like it. It's your rights, it's your paper. Keep your rights to your paper. You work for a government public health institution. Yes, I would strongly advise you that you also implement this policy. There is absolutely no reason why you could not. Rights retention policy is definitely something that could be adopted by any organization whose members and employees write outputs that are published in one way or another, and that are at risk of disappearing behind the paywall. So I would definitely advise any institution that publishes articles in any way, shape, or form to adopt such a policy. And then there's one that I leave to Elwin. What open access policies or recommendations applies for data related with cost actions?
Yes, so I will briefly discuss this. So in our annotated rules, there is chapter 5, which also incorporates a paragraph on open access, and specifically state that, let's say, open access and more in general open science are the leading principle of cost actions. And for example, that data gathered in the context of a cost action should in general be publicly available. Now, occasionally, there's a good reason why data are not publicly available, or at least not in their full form. And it can, for example, be personal data protection. And these, of course, are, and that's also, of course, as you know, European regulation. So there are, of course, cases where data sharing is not fully available to all the participants of the action. However, they should be specifically motivated by the action. So if you don't share the data fully, which you gather in the context of your action, that should be justified, and there should be a justification in your communication plan and in your let's say in your action proceedings why this particular data is, let's say, not fully shared. So in general, we strongly recommend as well, because it's in the spirit of the cost actions, which is European research based in European countries and beyond, which are working on a similar topic. And the more they have access to common resources, to common data, the better they can work together. However, we see that there are certain cases where data are either temporarily or partially protected from full public view, and we can understand that as well.
Finally, there's also Olga's question from, for a research funding body, do you think that any grant should presuppose expenses for publication in open access, or should we concentrate on providing such funds to young career researchers? That's a difficult question. It really depends on your organization. In many organizations, most organizations, in fact, do indeed include an item, a budget item in the budget for open access expenses for publication. That is one possibility. Other funders have a different approach. They have a central fund that is specifically dedicated to costs for open access research, and where you can apply for that fund for publications. Should we concentrate on providing such funds to young career researchers? Possibly, but again, that depends on your own priorities within the organization. I definitely think that would be a good idea, but at the same time, why would you privilege young researchers over older researchers? So this is probably a debate that you should have within your own organization. But it's basically, institutionally, there's two ways of doing it. Either you include these costs, or you allow these costs to be paid out of the grant that you give to the researcher, or you have a separate central fund at the organization that where researchers can apply whenever they publish in open access, and then you make a contribution towards those, or you pay for the full costs of the gold open access publication. So I hope I No open questions, and we are 11:29, so this is perfect timing. Preprints are usually put on archive, where you place your AAMs. Yes, you can place your AAMs in archive. That is fine. Yep, you can update your preprint in archive, and that's perfectly perfect way to do it. You update your preprint with the AAM. Great.
All right.
9. We've answered all questions.
And we ended with almost the same number of participants as we started with. So it seemed that you really you kept people in the webinar, Johan. So that's really to your credit. Thank you very much. See that we had many questions as well, which is always a good sign. So thank you very much, Johan, for giving this very clear and thorough explanation of open access to our community, and also thank all participants for attending. Yeah, of course, if you have any questions about open access specifically in the cost situation, please do not hesitate to contact us after the webinar.